Good afternoon and welcome to Algiers for an exclusive interview with the President of Algeria, Abdelmadjid Tebboune. Mr. President, thank you for welcoming us here today at Al Mouradia for the celebrations of the independence of Algeria.
Thank you for being here, especially since you're coming to celebrate the anniversary of our independence together with us. I'd use the opportunity to say to you, you'll be welcome anytime you'd like to come.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We'll start with some current news, COVID-19. These last few days have been quite worrying. The number of cases has been breaking records. There are more than 400 now. Are you afraid of a resurgence of the epidemic here in Algeria?
We expected it to some degree. You know, any easing of lockdown necessarily leads to an increase in the number of people that fall ill. We'd like it to stay at this level. Measures have been taken by the Scientific Council, which is tracking COVID. We want these measures to be complied with by all citizens. Sometimes traditions are resumed as opposed to the recommendations that had been issued by the Scientific Council. We've observed an increase which is borderline acceptable, is mainly due to family contacts, weddings, circumcisions, and so forth. We've launched an appeal. We've also asked all local officials and others to ban these types of gatherings. These are gatherings that are too big in enclosed areas. Sometimes some young people don't believe in COVID as long as they haven't seen it for themselves. We wouldn't want any of their family members to be affected, but some of them think that this may be a ploy that may be used to try to hold them back, to prevent them from expressing themselves. But I think people are starting to become reasonable.
Are you ready to impose stricter measures if the curve starts to climb
Absolutely.
again?
Absolutely. At any rate, I can say to you, we are carrying out the decisions made by the Scientific Council. If that council feels it's imperative to move toward a lockdown, even a partial lockdown in a specific city or neighborhood or what have you, we'll do it.
You've also taken another decision, that not to reopen the borders. You said that you would open the borders when this scourge would be over, but can you be more specific? Do you have a timeline, a goal?
No, that's the objective. Airlines, you know, with France, we have basically 32 daily flights. Should we do a partial opening or no opening? The surrounding area of the country has opted for easing of lockdown, though there were high figures of contamination as well as deaths. We'll see, depending on our capacities, depending on our possible increase in figures, whether or not we should open up, especially since there's a principle that's governed our action for 4 to 5 months now. Since the appearance of COVID, anyone who comes into Algeria must be quarantined for 2 weeks to see whether they've come in contact with COVID or not. And among the people that we evacuated, Algerians that we brought back to the country, there were around 40 to 50 people who'd been contaminated. Fortunately, we have the system of quarantine. We were able to halt an exponential increase.
So we spoke about the health crisis, but there's also an economic crisis. The foreign exchange reserves have gone down in Algeria, of course, and some are worried that there might be a default on payments. Is Algeria in danger?
Not at all. Absolutely not, especially considering I saw this experience in '91. I was a member of the government that went to the IMF, announced a default in payments, but the situation was completely different.
So you rule it out now?
Out of the question, absolutely. First of all, we have currency reserves that are not enormous, but that do enable us to go 1 or 2 years. Plus, we have local production. Didn't have it at the time. You know, farming alone in 2019 produced the equivalent of $25 billion. We were fortunate considering the drop in oil prices. We didn't have to import anything. We're almost self-sufficient. The shops and markets, fruit sellers and so forth, had everything they needed. Was sufficient to meet demand.
But here, according to the IMF, which you mentioned, they've mentioned a 5% recession. Are you ready, like other of your neighbors, like nearly all African countries, would you be ready if the situation gets worse? Would you ask the IMF for help?
We'd rather avoid the IMF.
Everyone would rather avoid this.
When you've got the resources to avoid,
can you avoid this?
You know, we're a socially focused country. We're a country where social benefits, social transfers are very substantial. I believe that's their policy, the IMF. They're entitled to call for these savings on social benefits and so forth.
So you rule out knocking at the IMF's door?
Not. We will not. But that said, we are periodically in touch with the IMF, and we take account of their guidance pertaining to the national economy.
Up to a certain point. I'd like to get back to the political situation in Algeria. In the last few days, several well-known members of the Hirak group, the movement that put an end to Abdelaziz Bouteflika's presidency, that these members were freed, Karim Tabou, Amira Beraoui, Samir Ben Larbi, and you also pardoned 6 people. Human rights NGOs mention about 60 people still being behind bars. So are you going to continue pardoning people? Have you taken a decision to free these people who were imprisoned for reasons that these organizations denounce?
As president, I will carry out my constitutional powers to grant a pardon whenever necessary. That having been said, I would like to make something crystal clear. Justice has spoken. Some people have been detained, and some people have been freed. They had provoked slander, incited people to mutiny among some of the armed forces. That's completely prohibited.
Human rights organizations allege that these regions are simply used to quell the opposition.
They're entitled to say this. I can assure you. Just look at the Algerian newspapers. We're the only third world country in Africa, in an Arab country, to have 160 dailies, hard-hitting newspapers. No one's ever been disturbed. You can be opposed to ideas, voice differing ideas, different policies. There's no problem with that. The problem is slander, libel. Criminal law doesn't allow that and will not.
Will you pardon other people? Will you free
Possibly.
other people? Can you be specific?
Maybe. We're moving into a period that will require all Algerians make an effort. I think we might not agree on a policy, but we are moving toward a much calmer climate, making it possible to move toward changes I personally promised.
The constitutional reform. Because with COVID, everything's been delayed. So what is the timeline for the constitutional reform? You should get a draft bill, and then it will be put to referendum. You talked about this before, but
our target was at the latest by the end of June.
But you've gone beyond that now.
Nature caused these circumstances. It's not our fault. This was postponed. Well, not postponed, but discussions are certainly ongoing. Discussions of the Constitution continue, even speeded up recently. We've got basically 2,000 proposals that have been made to amend, withdraw articles, build on some articles, add articles to the Constitution. We'll take these into account. The committee has begun meeting. We're going to be extending that committee to bring in other views beyond their initial opinions, bring people together.
Will you be including people who regularly took part in demonstrations?
That's not a criterion, but if amongst them there are constitutional experts, sure.
So what is the timeline? You must have an idea about that.
I believe if COVID figures continue going down, if the figures get very low, we could conceivably have a referendum at the back-to-school time.
Meaning?
September, maybe October.
September, October. So you stated that this would be the end of the presidential system. People talked about a semi-presidential system. What does that mean? Is it a bit like the Fifth Republic in France that could be used as a model?
The model will be a fully Algerian model.
I understand your message.
We said this many times. We've had cultural influence. We've got our own culture. We're moving towards something that is our own. We're not going to mimic anyone. That boils down to nothing. There's no point in doing that. We don't have the same mentality nor the same approach. We don't have the same democratic underpinnings and so forth. But we're moving toward a system, a semi-presidential one, giving a great deal of authority to elected officials, members of parliament, the National Assembly. The National Assembly will be proposing bills itself for the first time. It will be allowed to set up any and all oversight committees regarding various subjects, regarding a ministry, regarding a given sector or what have you, and will take account of their views. They will provide oversight of the government's management. At the same time, we are setting up many checks and balances, preventing in the future any shift toward personal power.
So speaking of personal power, we already spoke about the legal proceedings against the Hirak activists. There's also legal proceedings against the former members of the regime. There's been heavy prison sentences that were given to the ex-prime ministers Abdel Kahia, Abdelmalek Salal, as well as Ali Haddad, the head of the Business Leaders Forum. But what about Abdelaziz Bouteflika? His prime minister has said that he should be called as a witness, and others would like him to stand trial. What is your opinion on this?
I think justice has spoken. Well, not against him. If justice asks for this, if the Justice Department does, it's up to them. But for the time being, it's not on the agenda. The proven facts are not of a political nature, nor do they have anything to do with any kind of uprising or insurrection.
The Prime Minister said that all the orders came from Bouteflika.
But carrying out the orders, I can order you to do something, but you then turn it around, use the opportunity to go too far.
So you do not want him to stand trial. You were briefly his prime minister, and you were in favor of him running a fifth term. I'd like to ask you a question. He was already in a rather difficult state. Do you regret this?
I want to make that crystal clear. I was never in favor of a fifth term in office. No, never. I'd been kicked out in 2017. This idea of the fifth term came up in 2018. In 2018, I was at home, and I was not in any way in favor of a fifth term in office. I didn't feel it made sense. As Prime Minister, I'd been in touch with him. I know he couldn't speak well anymore.
But you didn't speak out about this at the time.
Nobody asked me my opinion. I'd been kicked out.
I'd like to get back to relationships between France and Algeria. You had two conversations with President Macron. There were some tensions recently. Do you get the feeling that you're getting along better now, going more over diplomatic exchanges?
We've had several talks.
The conference on Libya.
On Libya, yes, Libya, among other things. We've had bilateral relations, many discussions. We've talked very calmly, in a relaxed fashion. I feel that with President Macron we can achieve a lot, go a long way toward appeasement, settling issues pertaining to memorials and memory. He's a very honest person. He wants to appease the situation. Of course, upholding French interests. and all the while making it possible for relations to become natural once again, natural relations between two independent sovereign countries. It's true, Algeria is a former colony, but for 58 years it's been a state, an influential state, a pivotal state, who's listened to and heard internationally, locally, on this continent and elsewhere. So we're moving toward appeased relations. I feel President Macron is truly sincere. He is an honest person. He's got a clean record, very clean record. He is not in any way involved in anything that's going on.
Could a visit be expected soon?
We talked about it. It's possible. It's just a question of timing.
A visit to Paris?
Visit to Paris, or even Mr. Macron's visit here.
So, of course,
remember, if there were a visit would be a state visit, not a working visit. Considering COVID conditions here and there, the question would be, would these conditions be favorable? Think about having to wear masks and so forth. We're looking into this. And considering the fact there's a great deal on our agenda here, you realize a state visit requires the absence of at least 10 days, takes time to prepare it and so forth. I believe 10 days would be a lot of time in my agenda right now when we're speeding up the democratic process. We're working toward that.
So we've seen the return of the 24 skulls of the Algerian freedom fighters who were in France, and they will be buried on Sunday at the Martyrs Square at the El Alia Cemetery here in Algiers. This is a first gesture, a strong gesture that Algeria has been expected. Have you discussed with President Macron of other possible gestures? There are other issues such as the missing people, the return of national archives, the nuclear tests in the Sahara. Do you get the feeling that President Macron has a clean record when it comes to memory? Are there any other gestures that are expected?
I think he was very receptive, really understood the request by Algeria. It's a necessity for us. I've said this several times. For that matter, we just established a special television channel, a remembrance channel, a memorial channel. We have a Memorial Day. He himself, President Macron, was courageous enough to say what others have not said. President Macron said, he was the first to say, that colonization was almost a crime against humanity. President Macron said the problem needs to be settled.
Well, you also spoke of crimes against humanity, referring to the massacre that took place on the 8th of May 1945. A crime against humanity usually demand formal apologies or reparations. Do you expect France to present formal apologies?
I think we've already had a quasi-apology. Another step needs to be taken. There have already been very positive comments on what we're requesting from many French officials. We've discussed it now. In France, they're now talking about a massacre in Sétif. That word had been banned up until not long ago. So I can say, with President Macron, there's no animosity, no hatred, there's mutual, full respect on both sides. We need to tackle this issue of memory, which implies a lot of things in our relationship.
So you think that President Macron will be able to present formal apologies to Algeria?
I can't.
But this is what you're hoping for?
We hope for it. It would provide for an appeasement, calm the climate, make things more serene for our economic relations, cultural relations, for good neighborly relations. After all, there are 6 million Algerians that live in France. They can make a contribution there and a contribution here, and so on and so forth.
So I'd like to talk about the situation in Libya. You were worried a few months ago about the situation there. Now I imagine that looking at the situation on the ground, you must be even more worried. You spoke about it becoming a new Syria, but have we gone beyond that now?
We may go beyond that, go beyond the Syrian situation. We discussed this with President Macron. We discussed it amongst ourselves in Berlin. At that time, 4 some months ago, I said, if we can't manage to achieve a ceasefire, bringing us back to the Libyan basis, to build a state based on popular legitimacy. If we can't get there, we may see Libya turn into a type of Syrian situation. That's where we've gone now. It's the same players, the same participants, same methods. Libya is fortunate that the tribes have not stepped in, as opposed to what some people may be thinking. It's much more mercenaries. It's people that, if they're overwhelmed, the tribes then might defend themselves. We're talking about armed defense. Then it would no longer be the Syrian system, but we'd be talking more about a Somalia-type situation. Then nobody, all bets would be off. It might turn into a terrorist sanctuary. Everybody would push their terrorists there, their own terrorists there, push them to Libya to get them out of their own countries.
Are you still prepared to play the role of mediator, even as the situation's getting worse every day?
We have hope. We have talks with everyone in Libya. You've seen this. People come periodically. We're equidistant between everyone, really. And we're not taking sides with one group versus another. Our objective, this is something that's in the beginning stages. We're getting there with President Macron. We're getting there with our Italian friends. Other parties are involved. They've understood. Now, we're not talking about the marching in and out of armies that we can achieve anything. The winners today become the losers tomorrow and vice versa. Taking some little samples, 5 here, 5 there, having them meet here, there, and everywhere, that doesn't settle the problem. We need to move toward a solution once and for all, which means consulting the population through its tribal organization or what have you. We need to organize elections via transitional institutions, if need be. The current government is one, but it's overwhelmed. So this needs to be tackled in a much more comprehensive fashion for all of Libya, moving toward institutions, a national assembly, electing a president, 2 vice presidents, taking into account regional balances in Libya. Then the establishment of a constitution. They already have one, but it could be improved on.
And you're ready to hold these talks here?
Absolutely, yes, on the request. Sorry if I might step in. The reason we haven't done so yet, we handed over to Ms. Merkel. We promised her in Berlin that no one would take a personal initiative to in any way hinder what had been done in Berlin under her auspices.
And now we've moved beyond that.
Now we can.
We spoke about Libya, now we'll talk about another one of your neighbors, Morocco. Recently, Morocco seems to have started construction work on a military base, or some people say it might be military barracks, that are being built near the Algerian border. And we've also heard that Algeria is also going to build 2 military bases. Can you confirm this, and what does this mean? Because up until now there's been a war of words, but is this moving on to something else?
Well, so far it's been a verbal escalation, but the Moroccans are moving on to another type of escalation. I hope this will stop.
What escalation, President?
We hope every bit of happiness and development to our brothers in Morocco. We have no problem with the Moroccans. The Moroccan brothers seem to have a problem with us. We have none with them.
But can you confirm that you are going to build these bases?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
So you said we were in a verbal escalation. Could this go beyond that?
I don't think so. Wisdom has always prevailed between the 2 countries.
But the borders have been closed for 25 years.
The borders were closed as a reaction to a humiliating action against the Algerian people. These were closed when there was the establishment of a visa for Western Sahara.
last question to wrap this up. Is it imaginable, can you imagine that you take the initiative, since there are these hurdles, and in other relationships like with France and Algeria, we needed some drastic steps, even in very tense situations?
It's not at all the same situation. Between France and Algeria, since 1962, we've had a relationship, been in contact. Sometimes there have been ups and downs, but contact's never been broken off. Sometimes our relations were at a higher point, sometimes a lower point. Relations between Algeria and France, as you know, are very complicated, emotional, volatile. But with Morocco, we have no problem whatsoever. No problem. To be absolutely official, we have no problem whatsoever with our Moroccan brothers. They appear to have a problem with us. Some insults voiced, claiming that we had intention of doing this, that, or the other thing. Everything we do within Algeria domestically is analyzed, thinking we have some ulterior motives. We have none. No ulterior motives against our brothers in Morocco or the King of Morocco. Now, if they think an initiative should be taken, I think that would be good. They could take an initiative which would bring to an end once and for all this matter.
Mr. President, thank you very much for welcoming us here at El Mouradia once more to celebrate the independence of Algeria. Thank you to all of you for watching this exclusive interview on France 24. Please stay tuned for more news.